Welcome to the Rock's Back Pages podcast. My name is Barney Hoskins. I'm in foggy old London town on a lockdown grid with Mark Pringle.
Hi, Barney.
And Jasper Mearison Bowie.
Hello, Barney.
Not in foggy London town, but in foggy Somerset is our very special guest, Jez Butterworth. Good morning, Jez.
Good morning.
It's an honour to have one of Britain's leading playwrights in our virtual cupboard. So thank you for making time today. A little later, we'll be talking about Dolly Parton and about Farrell and his Lollapalooza festival. But for the first part of the episode, we're going to focus on your musical passions, Jez, and particularly the band. The first I knew of you was when I was working on Mojo magazine, and I commissioned a short piece about a play called Mojo, written by a young man named Jez Butterworth. And it was set in late 50s London clubland, and I believe came out of a conversation you had about like Soho and gangsters with none other than Malcolm McLaren. How did you happen to have that conversation with Malcolm McLaren, Jez?
So Malcolm did a show called The Ghosts of Oxford Street in about 1992, which was just, I think, a Channel 4 show. And he was going to do one on the ghosts of Père Lachaise. And he needed someone to write it. And I was like 23 years old and straight out of university. And I went along to meet him, and I ended up getting the job, which meant that 24 hours later, I was in Paris with Malcolm, walking around Père Lachaise as he told me all the stories about it. It turned out that all Malcolm wanted was to get the commencement money from Channel 4 for Père Lachaise so he could piss off back to Poland and live cheaply for another year. He never really intended to do the project. And so really excited as I was for my first TV job, within 9 days I was fired from it because Malcolm had done a runner with all the cash. And I didn't see him for a couple of years. And then he came along to see the play Mojo, and he remembered a conversation that we had sitting on a grave in Père Lachaise, where he was waxing rhapsodic about the relationship between early rock and roll and organised crime and all of the scene that was going on in Soho. And he told me about it for an hour. I remember my feet went numb. It was so cold sitting there in January, but I was rapt by what he was saying. And he looked at me squarely in the eye and he said, "You know, Jez, someone should really write something about this." And I thought, when he ran off to Poland with all the money, I thought, right, I'm going to do just that. I'm going to just nick this idea straight off you. And so 2 years later, he comes to see it at the Royal Court, and we met up afterwards. We went for a drink round the corner, and he said, "Yeah, I really enjoyed it." And he looked at me and he said, "Did I ever tell you about my idea?" And I was like, I don't remember that, Malcolm. I don't recall.
Mind it's straight out of the McLaren playbook. I mean, you know, he's been happy to steal.
McLaren the McLaren.
Yeah.
Seriously, I think, you know, if the Rolling Stones had sticky fingers, he had the stickiest fingers going, didn't he? And I really felt like it was a burglar forgetting to lock their back door.
We did a podcast episode not that long ago. In fact, it was the first one we did in lockdown with Paul Gorman, who wrote the McLaren biography. So we were talking about his sort of giant historical crush that he had on gangsters, and nightclub life in London and all of that. He was very smitten with that. He even did this long interview, which I've seen with Peter Grant, Led Zeppelin's infamous manager. Yeah, he never quite got over this fascination. Anyway, so that really you have Malcolm to thank for what's been an incredible career.
I have him to thank for so much. I mean, those nine days come back to me at the oddest times. I mean, I really think he was the most extraordinary set of ideas. He was an amazing man. And he just, on his day, with a win behind him, you know, it really was like extraordinary to listen to what he had to say and his opinions. And he taught me probably more in that graveyard than I'd learned at 3 years at university, you know, just about sort of culture, about situationism, all these different things, how punk came about. It was absolutely fascinating, you know, to find yourself sitting in a cafe in Paris listening to Malcolm just sort of tell you all of that over countless glasses of red wine. It really was a proper education.
I can believe it. I mean, look, Jez, you are, it goes without saying, most famous for the play Jerusalem, probably the most acclaimed British play of the last, I don't know how many years or decades. But music has never been far from your work. I mean, you co-wrote with one of your brothers a film about James Brown. And in a sense, the reason that I asked if you would be kind enough to come on the podcast was because, we had a brief exchange about the band and that you had written a script based on John Niven's incredible novel or novella, Music from Big Pink. So when did you first sort of get into the band or into, that kind of American music?
So me and my brother, Tom, we were 2 of 5 kids and we lived in a quite small house outside St Albans. And as we grew bigger, we had to move out to the garage because there wasn't room for us in the house. And so me and my brother lived in half the garage as we were growing up. And he was 4 years older than me. And he had a friend called Simon Audley who had a brother who was 4 years older than him. And Chris Audley had a massive record collection. And so Chris was 17 and I was 9 in that 2 4-year gaps. And one summer, Chris and Simon went on holiday and we went round and borrowed his entire record collection. And Chris had about 300 LPs. And so I sat in that garage that summer, aged 9, and we maybe had 4 or 5 LPs in the house up until that point. And suddenly we had 400 and we just went through them all, and it was everything you could name. Chris had just immaculate taste.
Wow.
And it was everything. It was even stuff that there's all sorts of stuff I still know that I'm not mad about, but I know because of that summer where I just listened to it all. It's like I know everything by Frank Zappa, who I never listened to, but it was all in there, and but all of the stuff that I really, really grew to love was there. And so by the time I sort of went to secondary school, I knew every band song.
That is extraordinary.
By the time I was sort of 10 or 11.
That is extraordinary. I mean, I noticed I read this New Yorker profile of you by Emma Brox, and towards the end of it, you allude to the infamous Neil Young tour of the UK in 1973, where he played the whole way through Tonight's the Night, and everyone booed and complained, rather like Dylan and the Hawks, and we're talking about that in a minute. But everyone sort of complained. And so at the end he said, all right, I'll play you a song you know and you've heard before. And he just played Tonight's the Night, the song again. I mean, he had balls, didn't he?
I adore that.
Yeah.
I really stand up and salute that.
Yes, completely. So, that is phenomenal that you knew the band's music before you went to secondary school. Tell me how, did you get to know John Niven after that novella came out, which I can't recommend highly enough. It is an extraordinary novel.
It's really wonderful. It's part of the 33 and a third series, and I think it's probably the only one I've encountered which chooses to fictionalize its subject rather than write some sort of, critical analysis of it. It's just, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't put it down. When I eventually, I think I first spoke to Robbie Robertson in 2007, and he had read it, and he felt that it was just eerily close to the atmosphere of what it was actually like as he recalled it. He said it was creepy in a way. It was like sort of haunting that somebody could channel and encapsulate, distill a spirit that they had only really experienced, second or third hand. He found that extraordinary. That's just to speak, that's sort of the best review John could ever get for that.
It's interesting that Robertson doesn't come out very well in the book either.
And it didn't bother him. That's a really good point. It didn't bother him remotely. When I say it didn't bother him remotely, it didn't bother him in 2007. When I spoke to him about it recently, he was massively dismissive of the entire adventure. But at the time when he read it, at first blush, he didn't mind. He thought that was a pretty accurate portrayal of how he would come across at that point. And I thought I thought, wow, here is someone who is not particularly interested in attractive portraiture, and it just wants to sort of get to what the spirit of the thing was. It was kind of rare.
I mean, I'm with you. I loved it. It's by far my favourite of the 33 and a third series. And maybe there's a case for more rock biographies being fictionalised in future, because the truth is often too boring to withstand. Unfortunately, I met John at one of my sister's parties on her boat, and I managed to offend him by saying how much I loved that book, but being slightly less enthusiastic about his other rock and roll book. What was the
Kill Your Friends?
Yes, Kill Your Friends, which I really struggled with. And I
loved to Kill Your Friends too.
And I made the mistake of telling them that I didn't like it, which he's really.
You're quite good at that mistake. Tell it like it is.
Oh God, yes. Well, the atmosphere chilled instantly,
And then he threw you off the boat.
And then,
yes, where it was even chillier.
Yes.
Jez, have you seen, as a matter of interest, I assume you have seen Once Were Brothers?
I have seen it.
Which is Robertson, as it were, telling the story through the prism of his own perspective, really. The featured writer on the homepage this week is going to be Aronowitz. Is Aronowitz by the time this episode goes out? There's like weird time lag about knowing that people can be listening to this sometime after we actually record it. So Aronowitz was in some ways the first like pop journalist, I would say, period, writing about the Beatles and Carole King and so forth in 1963 for the New York Post. He was also probably the first guy to write about the band. He went up to Woodstock. And so we're featuring this great little piece he wrote in 1968, which really gets the flavour of them. He's heard Big Pink, and he says, with music from Big Pink, the band dips into the well of tradition and comes up with buckets full of clear, cool country soul that washes the ears with a sound never heard before. Was Big Pink, would that have been the first band album that you heard, or was there another way in, Jez?
Yeah, it was. I think I can remember that I listened to that a lot, but I preferred the Brown album when I was 9 years old.
Jeez, this is unbelievable stuff, isn't it?
I definitely preferred it. And I think that was quite simply that it's just a little easier to swallow.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think it's simply a much better album than Big Pink. I mean, Big Pink was really influential on the likes of Eric Clapton, who people coming out of the whole storming bands playing the Fillmore period, But the second album, Brown album, is just stupendously good. I remember
thinking at the time it just sounded better on our crappy record player. It just sounded better. It's like you could decipher what was going on.
It's very clean and simple in that respect. There's much less production. Big Pink has odd things like bits of echo and reverb and things. And the Brown album is basically the sound of a small group in a room.
Well, it sort of invented lo-fi, didn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, Big Pink was done mainly at A&R Studios, which is one of the best studios in New York. Mm-hmm. And even though it was going for a sort of earthy sound, I think the real earthy sound was what they got in this pool house in West Hollywood. Sammy Davis Jr.'s old pool house. I know. Thanks, Sammy.
I love the photographs in the gatefold sleeve of them in that room. And you can see John Simon's feet up. John Simon, I took one of the photographs. He was the producer, basically more or less the engineer more than anything else. You can see his feet up, and they're all gathered around with all these kind of bits of rickety stuff and amplifiers and Garth's huge keyboard. It looks fabulous. And they look, both the nose and on the cover, they've got mostly kind of quite short hair. They've got a lot of facial hair, and they look like something out of the 19th century. The whole album sounds like it could have recorded been any time between 1869 and 1969.
Yes, exactly. I think Grill Marcus sort of said words to that effect. Jez, I'm looking at you on my screen thinking you could almost pass for Garth Hudson in 1969. So I don't know whether that's just a sort of happenstance, really, of lockdown.
I mean, obviously, there's other members of the band I'd rather look like. But, let's face it. Let's call it like it is, But I'll take it.
That's so funny.
I'm curious to know, because all three of you are big band fans, and what is it that... Well, how did I get? I don't know. But what is it that about this American country soul band that so captures as Brits? Why is it that evokes such a deep connection for all of you? That kind of music.
Well, it's funny. It's not just us. I mean, that first album broke up the Beatles and the Cream. It's there were these English people listening to it going, "That is vastly more authentic than the most authentic thing we can deliver. I must stop doing what I've been doing for the last." It's so powerful to that extent. So the question, I think, goes wider than that, which is what exactly was it that felt so exquisitely authentic? When you think about what a band like Fairport were trying to do here through similar kind of routes of just kind of like, let's just go back to the source, go back and get it. Yes, you could almost sort of, with the right lawyer, forensically prove why those songs are authentic, but they're not just like something that you just want to put on and dance to in the same way, or that haunt you or haunt me in the same way. And so I think that there was just this, what Fairport didn't have, let's say, that the band had, was just this 10,000 hours of making people dance. Yeah. Of going up and down the country and just honing what makes people move and what doesn't, and getting into this rhythm so that even when it's slowed down and even when the syncopation is more tranquil, just gets into your bones and gets your attention. They'd had to get people's attention over bar fights, over, the meals being served. They'd just been, it hadn't been dreamt up at Cecil Sharp House. Right. It happened out on the road. It happened in barrooms. And so it had something at its core, which I think was unfakeable. And then when you add to that the idea that Dylan comes into their life and has such an extraordinary effect on an individuals in that band at a crucial time. And I think you've got something which won't happen again.
Do you think they'd even thought about writing their own songs before they met Dylan?
Robbie probably had, because he did write a couple of songs in Ronnie and the Hawks.
Right.
I think he had those ambitions.
Okay.
Yeah, he wrote Bobaloo and some other song when he was like 15 years old, and Ronnie Hawkins bought them off him. This is before he even joined the Hawks. But Robbie does say that when they became Levon and the Hawks, after they left Ronnie, that there was this idea that they were going to go, and record stuff. And he remembers being in a recording studio, and they just started doing covers because they didn't have anything. They all looked at each other, and it was like, well, let's see what we've got. And no one had really thought that through. And the decision, therefore, to start getting involved with Dylan was actually out of necessity, wasn't it, Barney? Where it was...
But wouldn't you, also say that what became the Basement Tapes, which was the pre-Big Pink in chronologically, just being with a songwriter and seeing the process whereby he was doing what he did must have been an extraordinary education for them.
Well, that part of the story absolutely fascinates me, because it's the part I can sort of get, because I'm a writer. Mm-hmm. I kind of look at what happened there and try and sort of work out how on earth that's even possible, that you go from 0 to 60 in such an extraordinary way, where just by being in a room with someone who can write songs, you suddenly learn to really write songs. Yeah. It's a fabulous piece of osmosis. And it's really, for me, it's just really heartening to know that kind of basic skill is transferable, because it seems not to be in so many different other forms. I mean,
transferable to someone who's capable of picking up that particular ball and running with it.
That's exactly right. I mean, you find that whenever anyone's teaching writing, to a class of 800 people who've paid to come and see it, there's a good chance there's half a person there that can actually understand what's going on. Yeah. And it just happens that Robbie was that person. It was just like a bat waiting for a ball.
It's interesting, we were talking earlier, well, Jasper asked, what was it about the band that sort of connects with us? And I'm not a big lyric person. I mean, I'm one of these people, the world sort of does divide to some extent. People who hear the tunes and people who hear the words, and there are some people who hear both at the same time. I'm very much a music-first person. But I was grabbed by the narratives on that second album instantly. I mean, songs like King Harvest, which is possibly my favourite band song of all time. It's just an extraordinary set of stories. The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down, which is an evocation of the last year of the Civil War. But, I mean, just storytelling. It's fantastic.
Is it fair to say that The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down has become a problematic song now, do you think?
Silence.
It's
well, I mean, it's a question that's being asked, after Black Lives Matter and the resurgence of racism in America.
I think it's a really interesting question. There's kind of two questions around that song. One is, should anyone be allowed to write, to, as it were, to sort of put on anyone else's voice and sing their story? Should you be allowed to do that? If he were singing about, were he singing about a black experience, would it be seen as some form of blackface? So there's so much. I mean, I've got really strong feelings about that. I mean, Shakespeare's not from Denmark,
Sure, yeah. I didn't know that.
The one thing I'd say is, which makes it legitimate, so doubly legitimate, is that Robertson as a writer is inhabiting the body of a young man in the deep South at the very end of the Civil War. And then he's getting Levon Helm to sing it.
Yeah.
The only American, the only Southerner in the group.
A deep Southerner, so when they talk about Robert E. Lee, they don't talk about putting a statue in a town. They're saying, there goes Robert E. Lee. It's about the movement of armies around places which has hitherto been peaceful. I don't have a problem with it at all, I must say.
Okay. I just thought I'd throw it in there. Just to briefly talk about Aronowitz, because he's so important. He first went up to Bearsville when Albert Grossman, Dylan's manager, bought a house there. There are pictures of Al in Albert's kitchen and pictures of Al with Dylan there. So he was a really, really important kind of chronicler of that moment in Dylan's career. And I thought we might just listen to the first of a couple of very short clips of Al talking. And this is about Albert, in fact.
Clouds so swift, rain won't lift, gate won't close, ratings froze. But Albert was pretty kind to me anyway. When I was really broke and crazy and on welfare in Washington, D.C., he brought me up to Woodstock and gave me a free house to live in.
Really?
Yeah.
What year would that have been? When did you go like that? When did you first go up to Woodstock?
About 1980.
1980?
Yeah.
No, but in the 60s, when did you first go up to Woodstock?
Well, I guess it was 63.
About 63, yeah.
Around
And Dylan was already living there, hanging out.
Yeah, he first had a place on 4th Street, and then he moved up and lived in Albert's house.
Right.
Get your mind off winter time. You ain't going nowhere.
Yes, so that is my voice, as some might detect. I interviewed Al for my biography of the band, and it was a slightly disillusioning experience. This was a guy really who was not in good shape. He was living in New Jersey. And in a way, his story sort of dovetails with, if we talk about John Niven, the story of the Woodstock Bearsville Dream starts with like Big Pink and the Basement Tapes, but it kind of ends in terrible drug abuse. And John really captures this. Anyone who thinks Woodstock was some sort of Haight-Ashbury and Village form, certainly by the 80s, it was a rather broken place. Maybe if we just hear the second clip, this will give you some indication of what had become of the band by this point.
I came home once when I was living in Woodstock, and it was early in the morning. about 3 o'clock in the morning, and I saw Richard and his wife loading up their car near my house with boxes, and I didn't realize what it was until I got into my house, and they had broken into my house and had stolen my record collection.
Right.
But Rick's wife Elizabeth had told me the week before that was going to be robbed.
Right.
Yeah. So Rick was in on it too.
There comes a time when we must sip the wine.
So, I mean, this. I was really shocked when he told me this. I can still remember it. The idea that Richard Manuel and Rick Danko were so enthralled to their heroin habits that they were stealing Al Aronowitz's record collection in Bearsville. I mean, these were guys who had, reached the kind of pinnacle of success, flown around on Learjets with Bob Dylan, and this is what it had come to. Jez, I mean, did you, when you got to know a little bit more about the sort of shadow history of the place, was it a surprise to you?
I don't think it was a surprise. It was no less moving. There's a moment, I think, at the end of your book, Small Town Talk, where you describe, I think it's Rick Danko, going to play a show in Woodstock and arriving, getting on stage, opening his guitar case and finding that he's forgotten his guitar. Yeah. And there's something about that moment which is just so haunting that it's almost like sort of Orpheus-like. And it's, it's just that it would get to that. It's almost too perfect and poignant and tragic an idea. I mean, I think that it's almost one of the things that I find most fascinating about the beauty of rock and roll is that it's such a tightrope walk. It's just I forget which early Bohemian it was who said that the land of Bohemia is bordered to the north by magic, to the east by poverty, to the south by madness, and to the west by the hospital.
Wow. Gosh. Yeah. I won't be going to Bohemia for my holidays. In case I go east by mistake. That's very powerful.
I think John Niven hit on a gorgeous device when he sent his protagonist to jail for 7 years, thereby missing out the entire career of the band and coming back to see them as if in some Chris Nolan movie, just to burst back out into their final moments. And I think that absolutely it brought into stark relief what that journey is from one end of a rock and roll career to the other. I remember somebody saying, I was reading online about Ringo Starr's 80th birthday celebrations, and someone had written in the bit underneath it, the endless trawl of trolling. Someone had written, "My God, he looks absolutely amazing, doesn't he?" And the person beneath it had written, he said, "That's because it all cost him absolutely fuck all." and I just thought, that's that in a way. I mean, obviously Ringo's had his moments and had his demons, and it's unfair, but there's the point. There's something in there. The idea of what it does cost the individuals involved.
The other thing that's extraordinary is that what we were talking about earlier is their long years on the road as the Hawks, either with or without Ronnie Hawkins. The jump from that to life with and immediately after Dylan must have been staggering. I mean, completely transforming their experience. One moment they're lugging their own amplifiers on small stages in clubs up and down through Canada and east and the seaboard. And next moment, all of this world's broken open for them. Yeah. And curiously, by having it happen quite late, in a sense, actually must have made it harder for them to deal with, or certain individuals within that band to deal with.
Well, Rick and Richard, certainly,
yes.
and Levon to a great degree. Well, it's great. It's been fascinating talking to you.
Can I just say something about Aronowitz very briefly?
Yeah, of course.
It is that I love his writing.
Yes.
And if he had been more ambitious in terms of, let's say, being a book writer and so on and so forth, I think he would have a much higher reputation than he does today. He is of the new journalism generation very much. He started writing in the very late 50s, I believe, the early 60s. And he was a guy putting himself into his stories in that new journalistic way very, very early on, and writing for a major newspaper, which makes it even more curious. And I think his writing's fabulous. I think there are times when Aronowitz just writes like a dream.
Yes. Unfortunately, he was his own worst enemy, burned all his bridges and ended up, very unhappy guy. I think there was a little bit of redemption towards the end. We met him in New York, didn't we?
That's right, yeah.
We asked him if we could run some of his stuff on RBP. I'm just going to sort of slightly change direction.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
One thing I wanted to pick up on in terms of the authenticity thing. I think your answer, Jez, was fascinating in that what it means is that there's something about your point about it being a sort of, even Brits recognise that. It means that authenticity somehow transcends the surroundings that it was in, because there's no way to have been able to judge, not having ever been to the States, at 9 years old. You could not have judged whether or not it was authentic based on knowing it. There was something else that transcended what was going on to be authentic above and beyond the story itself, which I think is fascinating.
I think some artists hit the drum and it sounds forever, doesn't it? It just keeps on ringing forever. It goes right down to your deepest part of your soul and just stays there, stays vibrating forever. And I think that there is something that that happened to that band, the band, over a brief period of time, which was completely indelible, and is almost is almost proved by how quickly that subsided. I mean, as a moment, it kind of came and went for them. I recently sat down and tried to make I think that Stage Fright is a good album. I think that Cahoots is a less good album. They get progressively less good, but I think that you can put together another classic album out of what they did afterwards.
Yes.
But you can, and I've tried to do it. They have the material of another absolutely classic thing. So it's not to say that it just went cold on them.
No, I mean it was a brief. I mean, Northern Lights, Southern Cross, I think, is a very, very decent late band album. I listened to it far more than I listened to Cahoots, than I listened to Stage Fright. I mean, I think it's just it's the last sort of pretty brilliant bundle of songs that Robbie Robertson sort of came up with. But it's, I think all artists have a sort of limited shelf life. I bored Barney and Jasper before about my 4-year, 4-album theory, that even the greatest artists really only have that fairly small window. Something about popular music makes it so in a way that doesn't apply to other art forms, which is just one of those
things.
Of
course, you can come back with second and even third wins later.
Occasionally. Occasionally.
Someone like Neil Young, I think, sort of nosedived a little bit in the 80s, and then he sort of came back in the 90s with some pretty powerful electric music and some rather wonderful acoustic music. But we'll be here all day if we start going down that road. I mean, I did look, because we're in this kind of limbo of not knowing what the US election results are going to be, whether Biden's going to win it or not. I was just fascinated just to briefly touch on Jerusalem as a sort of a premonition of kind of Brexit Britain. And I just wanted to ask you a really simple question. Would Rooster, the extraordinary character played most famously by Mark Rylance, the sort of definitive British character that you created in that extraordinary play, would he have voted leave?
I don't think
I'm sure you've been asked that.
Yeah, I've never been asked that.
Oh, okay.
I don't imagine that he'd have probably slept through the whole thing.
Yes.
I don't imagine he would have got his shit together. It's interesting, that character, to me, because he doesn't ever really express much opinion about England or about politics or about what he thinks. It's just kind of like sort of projected onto him. I think he gives one opinion in the play where Lee is trying to get drugs on tick off of Rooster with some extraordinarily detailed thing of borrowing money off practically everyone there in order to get the drugs he needs right now. And Rooster says, this is exactly how it happened. This is just how the crash occurred. And I think it's the only kind of thing that he says on the sort of the subject of that's contemporaneous in that
Fair
kind of
enough.
way.
I mean, I was thinking just in terms, I'm so fascinated by this whole, we talk about polarization, schisms, and there is such a polarization in this country and in the US and other countries between the country and the city. And the band's music is in a sense very rural. And I find some of the stuff gets quite problematic because I love the countryside. I grew up a little bit in the countryside. I also am very urban and sort of metrosexually liberal in my viewpoint. Do you think it's sad that we've got to this sort of polarization? We're going to be talking about Dolly Parton in a moment, and this idea that kind of country music is as it were red state, and hip hop is blue state. Mm. How do you feel about this? I mean, you spend half your life in Somerset, half your life in London, and Jerusalem was set in Pewsey in Wiltshire. I'd be just interested in your kind of take on this.
Well, when I first moved I moved to the countryside twice, 10 years apart. And when I did it, the first time I was as broke as it's possible to get. I had a borrowed bicycle. The second time I had a bit more money, but I kind of ended up hanging out with a group of people who sort of hang out at the local pub and would end up at sort of barbecues in people's gardens that would go on for 3 days and end in fights.
Of course.
and sort of wondering what the hell I was doing there. It was my own lifestyle and taste that brought me down that road. And I wasn't there for research reasons. I don't really know what I was doing. It's just a little lost. It was a big discovery to me the second time, to discover that almost everyone in the countryside would vote Leave, for example. Would vote Tory if they were gonna vote, because that wasn't how I had that wasn't how I had growing up in the suburbs of St Albans. Nobody told me that. Nobody told me that it wasn't going to be more of a mix than I discovered it to be. I mean, I do think that the countryside in this country and the countryside in America mean kind of completely different things. When we put Rooster Byron in a caravan down a lane in the middle of the wood in England, it accessed a whole set of ideas that when you do it on stage in Broadway, it says a very different thing. In Broadway, it says this man is probably armed and might well be a Nazi, if he's living in these kind of conditions. And
Michigan militia.
It just flagged up a completely different set of mythical underpinning ideas to what it did here.
Fair enough.
Interesting.
Yeah. Let's briefly talk about Dolly Parton. We're featuring her as the artist of the week because her autobiography is coming out in about 10 days, Storyteller, aptly titled Storyteller, because she regards herself as, as much a songwriter as, as the singer that we know her to be. So we got 3 free pieces about Dolly that are great, including one by this fantastic writer Mark brought on board a few years ago, Jean Guerrero, who was writing about country music in a kind of, an alternative kind of hippie magazine. This interview is from 1971. He's talking to Dolly Parton and writing about her for hippies in the South, isn't he, Mark?
Yeah, no, it's really, really fascinating. It's the Great Speckled Bird, which was the great Atlanta underground paper. The equivalent here would be like Friends or International Times and so on and so forth. Yeah. And yet he's writing about country music. Now, country music was kind of the music of the enemy back then. If you were a long hair in the South, the people who wanted to run you off the road with their pickup trucks were people who
Easy Rider music. Easy Rider, exactly.
So Gene's going to these shows, interviewing these artists, and he's a long-haired guy. He had been on a lot of civil rights marches and things 2 or 3 years before. He was, from the political left. He's interviewing Dolly and Porter Wagoner, who Dolly, in the process of getting out, as one might say, from under Porter Wagoner, redefined herself as a great songwriter and a great solo singer. Gene's a fantastic writer. And he talks about going to shows and being hissed at by fellow audience members on the way out because he's a hippie. So actually going to these country shows was quite a risky thing for him to do. But he just loves it. He loves the music and writes very, very well about it.
I actually met him. He came to a reading I did for Small Town Talk in Arlington, Virginia, which is essentially like Washington, D.C. And he came on. So I was really, really pleased to meet him. And in this interview, Dolly talks about growing up on gospel music. She talks about listening to soul music what do we all broadly think? Jez, what do you think? What do you think of Dolly Parton? Are you a fan?
I'm a huge fan.
Yeah.
I think that it's in the songs. Her life aside and what she has by stealth delivered for feminism to the American culture, very quietly, dressed as something that looks like, just like it offers no threat whatsoever. And then the songs that she's managed to get into the bloodstream at the same time, it's one of the most fantastic clandestine operations in military history, frankly.
That's brilliant, yeah. She calls herself a cartoon, doesn't she? I mean, she does this wonderful interview that Jude Rogers did.
That's
and
she
says, I'm a cartoon.
It's a great interview. It's well worth reading.
She takes the piss out of herself. I've had so much plastic surgery, I'm never going to get old. I'll just die one day. Yeah.
There's a fascinating bit in Under the Influence, the Keith Richards documentary on Netflix, where Tom Waits is talking about the idea of persona and the idea that if you can dream up a look, a mask, as it were, then you haven't got to go out there like Judy Garland, he says, and put your heart on the line. You can sort of hide behind this thing. And I think Dolly Parton's the guy, as it were, the sort of the Moloch that she's created to just put out there and have everybody look at while she does what the fuck she wants and says things and takes the audience to places that other writers are just not able to do without really setting off all the alarms, has been fantastic.
Yeah, I'd say I admire her probably more than like her in a sense. Just stylistically, it's not sort of desperately my territory. But I actually loved Bits for all the reasons you've described. And she came up, as I said, as part of like Porter Wagoner's show, and he was a macho old fuck, who just really wasn't willing to give her any space at all. He was so angry when she went off and got her solo career together, because that wasn't supposed to happen. She was meant to be this little girl from Tennessee or wherever she comes from, who was going to play bull, and in that process, she learnt about the business, and apparently she has more control, both financially and all kinds of other aspects, than virtually any other artist around.
Well, she very smartly held on to the rights to I Will Always Love You. And Whitney Houston's version of that made her, just if she didn't have two pennies to rub together, she would have been a multi-millionaire, I think. Absolutely. Just from that, In this interview with Jean Guerrero, she talks about her voice. She says, I have a real strange voice. A lot of people, it just irritates them to death. I sound like a child, I guess. I think one of the things that gets overlooked is just what a brilliant singer she is. What a brilliant and beautiful voice that is. Would you agree with that?
I think I really do think that she's a consummate artist. And I think that those people who, when they come on the radio, you know who they are straight off. They're the ones. You don't confuse Rod Stewart with anybody else. You don't confuse Dolly. Within a bar who it is that you're dealing with, and I think that she's got that.
She's also a tremendously restrained singer, which is that. And because she's a restrained singer, you listen to her much more closely. You know how often the more flamboyant a vocalist is, the less you actually are really listening to them. You listen to the sound of them. With her, she pulls you into her songs just by never over-emoting or over-expressing.
There's actually a fantastic version of Jolene where someone has just pitched the whole thing down. And it just occurred to me, I just remembered it when you were talking about, she talked about her voice being childlike, because what pitching it down does is demonstrate, without maybe some of the preconceptions one might have about that pitch of voice, it demonstrates just what a controlled, fantastic singer she is. And it's really haunting, actually. It's on YouTube somewhere. It's well worth just digging out, just because it gives you a different perspective on that voice. I think it's really interesting.
Jolene, 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 I'm begging of you, please don't take my man.
I don't think it's any coincidence that she became one of the country singers in the 70s who were embraced by rock and roll, if you like. And the second piece by Barbara Sharon from Sounds in 76 is essentially about, it's an interview with Dolly, but she's talking about her friendships with and influence on, like Linda Ronstadt, Maria Muldaur, Emmylou Harris, particularly. And I think Maria was the first to cover a Dolly songs. She did my Kentucky Mountain Home or something on one of her albums, and of course that eventually led to sort of 9 to 5, and Dolly became a real kind of mainstream pop figure. But she was really embraced by rock and roll, and this is a piece in Sounds about Dolly.
One thing's very interesting reading the music press in my job as proofreader is you can see in the space of about 2 or 3 years, perceptions changing about Dolly. When she first comes over here, inevitably to play the big country festival at Wembley and so on and so forth, is, most, especially male rock and roll journalists, treated as something of a joke. And you can see respect for her rising and rising and rising over a space of about 5 years. She goes from being this sort of what she would herself describe as a cartoon character to someone that actually everyone writing about her is taking seriously. And it's very, you don't often see that sort of process when reading these things. It's really interesting.
I mean, of course, in the present moment, what we would all love is for a country music icon like Dolly to just say something critical about the incumbent president. Yeah. And of course, country musicians have remained as stumm as most Republican politicians for 4 years because they don't want to alienate their audience.
But, no, Dolly's been speaking up.
Has she?
She's been saying stuff.
Oh, I take it back.
No, absolutely. And she says, I'm going to lose half my audience here, but I don't like.
What has she got to lose? What ultimate she got to lose?
I don't like this president. I don't know what he's doing. She has. I mean, because she hasn't got records or hasn't had much product out in the last 4 years, she hasn't had a platform from which to speak. Okay. Insofar as people have been talking to her, that's the message she's been giving. Which is, she is.
I love her even more.
Yeah, she is pretty right on as old Dolly.
Okay, well, I think she probably is. Anyway, Dolly Parton, Storyteller, is out the week after next. Also out this month is this enormous box set of Perry Farrell stuff. Mark. This is really a real deviation from the band of Dolly Parton. Jane's Addiction, Porno for
the trademark Rock's Back Pages smooth transition.
This is Mark. Smooth our path into the world of Lollapalooza.
This is Stephen Daly interviewing Perry Farrell in April 1996. He's getting his own. He's basically been exiled from Lollapalooza, half voluntarily, half you suspect, through being pushed out by his business partners. He's fallen out of love with it. Let's listen to this straight away, this clip, the Lollapalooza clip.
Do you feel you've grown apart from it, or it's grown apart from you, or?
Well, I think I used to feel like it outgrew me. In other words, it got so big I couldn't keep my finger on its pulse. And I could keep my finger on its pulse, but I really couldn't get internally in there to operate on it. Pretty much all I could do is keep my finger on its pulse. And I'm going to be very honest with you. I really lost a love for it after we did it. I tried, but there's so much politics. And I'm talking about people in bed with each other, because you're an insider, how the industry works. It's not very different than any family or small community. It's incestuous.
He's wondering why bands like Metallica are being booked on Lollapalooza and things like that. He's struggling with all kinds of things. But consequences, he's setting up his own festival called ENIT, E-N-I-T, which is going to be a series of one-night events around the country involving dance, tents, and so on and so forth. People like Andrew Weatherall are going to play it. His then band Porno for Pyro is going to be on it. And he talking about how it's got to be a place where people can be really beautiful with one another, and it's all going to be wonderful. And he talks about the spirit and how they're going to get the spirit there. And we can listen to this quote where his idea of the spirit is, shall we say, a little odd in places.
Spirits are here, they come in the grape. I think it's pretty awesome. I think we should celebrate it. And we should learn to love every spirit, including cocaine, including heroin. Anything that's a spirit. If you don't love it and you fear it, you'll be at odds with it and you'll be at war with it. And then you've got the potential to be destroyed by it. I look at it like they're just a very, very, very powerful. The spirit of cocaine is just a very, very powerful spirit. Now, you can learn you can be friends with it. And what I mean by that is actually make a friend of it. Visit it occasionally. Don't visit it too much because nobody likes somebody banging on their door all the time. You'll never be their friend, and you'll be hated by them, and you won't be treated well by them. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Become an adult and learn to be amongst all the spirits that are on this earth.
I think I'll become an adult junkie. That should work well.
An occasional visitor of heroin.
Yes,
I tried it, man.
He does spout a fair amount of this sort of bullshit throughout the interview. I mean, he's not hideous, and Dale's a good interviewer, so he gets good stuff. The last clip we're going to play at the end of the podcast is very amusing. It's 1995, and the internet's just been invented. Because we're all on the information superhighway.
Yes, that's where I met you.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I've broken down to one side of the road. And you came along, gave me a hand. He's talking about how you can record on your computer, you can upload it to the internet, and it's going to change everything, and it's going to be for the better, because all the old business people will be fucked off, and there'll be new, wonderful people doing it. Well, that worked out well, didn't it? I mean, so it's I always love reading people talking about the internet in about 1995, and their marvellous batty predictions.
Someone should put a book together, really.
Oh, it's good.
I think it's fantastic.
That would be great, yeah.
Jez, were you ever at all interested? I mean, did you ever went to a Lollapalooza? Did you listen to Jane's Addiction? Was that period of time of any interest to you?
Perry Farrell has remained entirely peripheral to my to my musical knowledge. I mean, it just completely failed to punch through, and it wasn't a difficult room to get into, my musical interest. I mean, over the years, it's really been come one, come all. But Jane's Addiction, I couldn't name you one of their songs. Having said that, I thought what he just said made a lot of sense.
From personal experience, yes.
I have ambivalent feelings towards Perry Farrell. When Simon Reynolds was writing about Jane's Addiction, at a time when everything seemed terribly codified and sterile and boring, and there's this like anarchic, sort of Dionysian band from Los Angeles. I went to see them with Simon at Brixton Academy. I did think they were rather extraordinary and sort of like out of time and place. And I went to the first Lollapalooza, funny enough, in New Jersey with Simon, and there was something rather glorious about Perry, very shamanic and charismatic. I'm slightly saddened by this strange sort of fading out of his profile. I thought he was an interesting and maverick character, and some of Jane's stuff is pretty great. We didn't have a Perry Farrell audio before. I think it's on RBP. It's good to have him there, and we'll hear more from him later.
Make friends with cocaine.
I just love it. I love it. Because all the interviews really about like Mother Earth, isn't it? And these
planting trees,
non-corporate and planting trees.
Yeah,
and then the spirits of heroin and cocaine are going to come into the picture.
He met these Swedish guys somewhere, and their job was planting trees, and he books them to go to this festival, go around planting trees wherever they put this festival. It's marvellous hokum.
I mean, James were a very druggy band, and I mean the two main albums that they made are very, very kind of dark and druggy.
Weird that the band with the name Jane's Addiction was a druggy band. I
know it's hiding in plain sight, isn't it? Really, it's like a purloined letter. Oh, you mean they were druggies?
No, someone else. Someone called Jane was the druggie. They were okay.
Yeah. Well,
they were fine. It was actually an abstinence campaign about Jane's Addiction.
Right. Okay. Moving on from the peripheral world of Perry Farrell. Mark, talk us through some of your highlights in the week's library load.
And Jez, chip in if you've got anything to say about any of this, be our guest. Well, funnily enough, we were talking about the band, the Hawks, Bob Dylan. An uncredited review from Disco Music Echo, 14th of May, 1966, of the very first date of Bob Dylan and the Hawks' tour of Ireland and the UK, which is them playing the Adelphi Cinema in Dublin. This writer, and apparently the fans surrounding him, really didn't like what they were seeing. He says, but the 15-minute solo spot was quickly forgotten as, backed by 2 electric guitars, organ, piano, tambourine and drums, Dylan moved into Act 2, a pro-become Chuck Berry performance which produced instant reaction. Shouts of traitor, stuffed gollywog, and lower the mic were heard amongst slow hand clapping and catcalls.
The racism in there. I mean, when I read that, I was really shocked. I mean, that is just latent racism, isn't it? Or overt racism.
Yeah. Moving forward to 69, Melody Maker, Chris Welch talking to Steve Winwood. This is odd. Steve Winwood started Traffic in 67. That'd be right, wouldn't it? And then basically broke up the band at the beginning of 1969. In this, he's already talking about jamming with Eric Clapton, which of course would turn into Blind Faith. And he talks about playing on Electric Ladyland, Jimi Hendrix. But he's in a weird sort of floating space at the moment. He says, everybody seems to think volume was the revolution of music. That's okay theatrically, but not musically. He talks about Traffic. He says, sure, I feel regrets about Traffic. It was such a nice band, but nice things don't usually go on forever. Well, as it happened, by the end of the year, he pretty much reformed the band, and they went on for another 3-4 years after that. It's played one of the most boring shows I've ever seen in my life at the Albert Hall in 1972. Just crushing. Ivor Davis in the Daily Express interviewing John Lennon. John Lennon is on his lost weekend in Los Angeles. It's 1973.
Yeah, this is great.
It's really good. And I'll just chuck some quotes out. He says, I'm not saying I'm not neurotic anymore, but I can handle it better, and I don't need to get ulcers and a heart attack. He says, I came through everything. Beatlemania, the Maharishi, therapy, American immigration. It's all water for ducks back, and I put it down to experience. He says, I wish Paul would send me a letter now and then. With all the legal stuff, we'll be tied together for a long time to come. He's very wistful about Paul in this interview, actually, in a curious kind of way.
That's surprising to you.
Yeah, and the last thing I got here is, when I'm sardonic, I call England to Denmark. When I'm feeling warm, I call it home. Maybe I'll end up there when I'm old, which of course was never going to happen. Mm-hmm. So it's a really good interview. I mean, Ivor Davis is kind of is the entertainment correspondent for Daily Express, but he's surprisingly, his questions can be surprisingly acute, and it's a very, very interesting interview. Yeah. Village Voice, 1975, Richard Goldstein, The Dark Side of Bette Midler. He sort of just investigates who Bette Midler is in relation to New York, in relation to the gay community that she, as a performer, came out of, and also very much in relation to Barbara Streisand. You could say they could have been 2 pigs in a pod, but actually they're very different as personalities. But so says, one may write a typical showbiz lead to her story, her being Bette Midler, since showbiz is what it is. And yet, because of what she is, Bette Midler has always belonged in an existential rag like this. Unlike Streisand, whose success seems predicated on her own forgetfulness, I cease to wonder in my art about the reasons why I am as I am. Bette's art is a culmination of her anxiety. If her current appearance on Broadway is fraught with apprehension, that is because Souris, in its sincere sense, is what her work has been about. I love Richard Goldstein stuff. Sometimes I don't understand a word he's saying. He's sort of, preempted Paul Morley and Ian Penman in that respect. But
when we had Jude Rogers on the other day, I was quite surprised to hear that, because she'd interviewed Adele, and to hear that Bette Midler is one of Adele's sort of secret passions.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense or not, but Bette Midler was a pretty kind of unique figure in what still is.
Yes.
But in the 70s when she first emerged.
I mean, she had already had this is around the time of her second album, which Goldstein doesn't like very much.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But he talks about her emergence. He doesn't mention the Continental Bars or anything like that. But of course, Bette Midler came up as an entertainer, backed by Barry Manilow on piano at the Continental Bars, which is a gay bathhouse.
Well, and Richard Goldstein himself came out many years later.
Well, in fact, by now,
out then.
No, I think he is by the time.
He is out by then.
He wrote this because he is increasingly, for Village Voice, just writing about gay issues rather than about music or anything else. Very good, anyway.
Do you wanna dance?
Speak of the Devil, Paul Morley, Newman's Express, January 79, and it's about...
That was a bit gratuitous. Speak of the Devil.
Well, I just vaguely... Anyway, it's interesting. He's writing about Manchester and about the emerging scene. He writes about 3 bands, Spherical Objects, The Passage, and Joy Division. Joy Division are about to appear with a couple of tracks on the very first Factory release, which is a compilation album. Yes. I believe that's right.
Factory Sample, wasn't
yes.
it? I think? Yeah.
And he says their 2-year development is a scruffy patchwork of naivety, mistakes, gullibility, and indecision. Yet, gloriously and significantly, their actual music has developed from clumsy 3-chord exuberance into an open spatial rock sound that discreetly alters rock instruments' accepted roles in a subtly different, equally appetizing way to that used by the Banshees or Public Image. Trying to get his head around Joy Division, who do speak in this piece as well.
Do they? Does Ian Curtis speak in?
He does.
Does he? Okay. Because there really aren't very many extant interviews with Curtis. He was pretty taciturn young man.
Yeah. No, he says, doesn't say a lot, but he says, in fact, Morley says that they aren't articulate as a group. That, trying to get conversant is pretty difficult. This is very much, I think, Barney, for certainly you and I, possibly Jasper, can't talk about jazz, but Luther Vandross, Cheryl Lynn at the Greek Theatre, Los Angeles, reviewed by Richard Croman for the LA Times in October 82. And the headline is Vandross, a staggering potential. It says, Luther Vandross may have once toured with David Bowie as a backing singer, but he obviously didn't pick up much of rock star's flamboyance. Vandross is one of black music's brightest arrivals in years, and his show last week at the Greek Theatre was a periodically stunning showcase for his multitude of talents, but he's not yet a great showman.
Well, he was never a particularly brilliant showman. He was always a little awkward, couldn't dance. Mm-hmm. But I think one of the great singers of 70s and 80s soul music and writers and just craftsman, actually. Yeah. I think he was...
He's pretty rude about Luther's marvellous version of House is Not a Home later in this review.
Shame. It's wonderful.
Jazz Vandross, someone...
I can't see Jazz as a Vandross man, particularly as he looks like Garth Hudson.
That he does on Young Americans. I thought that was fabulous. I didn't really go wildly for his solo stuff, but I thought the documentary about how they put together a track like Win was just absolutely extraordinary with the syncopation of the voices and the different registers. Yeah. I found absolutely fascinating. As a writer, I honestly would try and steal that idea of how you throw an idea backwards and forwards among as it were, a chorus. I watched that over and over, listened to that song and that album over and over while I'm writing.
Yeah. Jasper, don't we have a piece on
Young
Americans?
I was about to say, I was going to throw in there that we actually have a reappraisal of Young Americans for 2007 this week, which is a really interesting article, Darrell Easley in Record Collector. So as he writes about how Young Americans is David Bowie's most underrated album, about how he kind of had this cross-cultural concept that he was trying to make happen on that.
I think it's aged very well, Young Americans, I have to say. I wasn't too sure about it when I was like 15 years old. I now think it's pretty damn great.
I loved it when it came out. It was last Bowie album, I think, one of the last Bowie albums. I mean, what year did Young Americans?
75, right? 75, 73 or 4, 74.
Then he did his Berlin album.
75.
His next album's the Berlin.
Was Station was the missing link in a way, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that was absolutely brilliant. It was actually the beginning of a fantastic period for Bowie. And actually the stuff I like of his the most. I like Ziggy Stardust, don't like Aladdin so much. You know, I mean, a lot of stuff left me pretty cold.
So all of those albums were in Chris Audley's record collection that arrived in my garage.
I bet they were.
Excellent.
Chris Audley. We're going to have to get him on the podcast.
I'm skipping past a couple of things because I know we're sort of fairly over time. There's a very good piece on Interview with De La Soul by David Stubbs and Melody Maker in 89.
Oh, super. I have to check that out.
Stephen Wells, his reassessment of the Velvet Underground from the NME, 5th of June 1992. This is really wonderful. Wellsian stuff. He says, true story. I'm at the Smash Hits Christmas party. The disco's blamming out non-stop teeny bop fun stuff, and the joint is bopping with the fizzing, giggling energy of 100 or so pissed female teenage sex fiends. Fun, 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 fun. Everybody's having a great time, except the serious rock hack. The serious rock hack leans across, his face a death mask of fear and loathing, and he says sagely, hang the DJ, eh? And you know what he'd rather be listening to? He'd rather be listening to the Velvet Underground. And so he basically, it's not a long piece, but he just basically tears the Velvet Underground a second arsehole.
It plays into that great trope that when Velvet Underground Nico came out, everyone who bought it and listened to it became a rock critic.
He says, but as with any groovy shindig, there are a bunch of miserable cool bastards. He's talking about the 60s and hippies and all the colour and good, wonderful drugs, as he says. But as with any groovy shindig, there were a bunch of miserable cool bastards who were out to spoil everybody else's fun. The Velvets wore black, man. Yes, you can blame them for goth. They glorified tedious, crappy lifestyle of the heroin junkie. Yeah, glorified, as in made cool. Show me the Velvet's lyric that mentions, even in passing, nausea, irritable bowel syndrome, spots, bad breath, your teeth falling out, and pooing your trousers.
Oh, that's so funny. It just reminds me, en passant, that in the Al Aronowitz audio interview, Al talks about taking Robbie Robertson to see the Velvet Underground.
Yeah, that's right.
At the Dom.
And he walks out after about 15 minutes.
Because
somebody's told him, for some reason, somebody's told him that Lou Reed is the next Jimi Hendrix. And I can't think...
I think Lou Reed was telling people that himself.
Short of describing Nigel Farage this week, that Trump described him as the king of Europe, you can't really think of a less likely nomenclature.
Oh, Lord.
Brilliant.
Anyway,
Brilliant.
I love this piece. I mean, I love the Velvet Underground, but actually I really see what Swells is talking about.
Yeah, completely.
You know.
Yeah.
And lastly, a Lloyd Bradley retrospective interview with Public Enemy from Mojo in 1999. Flavor Flav is always good. Whereas the main thrust of Public Enemy is to sound well thought out and considered, I'm the one that comes and brings that I don't give a fuck to the records. Man, you have any idea what an honour it is to be classified as the Sammy Davis Jr. of rap? That's big.
I love it. It's the second Sammy Davis Jr. reference in the podcast.
It's amazing.
One with the band in the pool house, and one with
brings it full circle.
That's my lot. That's my lot, chaps.
Jasper, over to you. We've been having far too much fun, and we do have to wrap up pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think I'll just mention one thing actually, since we do have to wrap up, and because it's our new earliest Amy Winehouse article and earliest Amy Winehouse interview. And it's great. It's Dave Simpson in The Guardian on the 28th of October, 2003. So this is just when Frank is coming out. And the headline is Dietrich with a nose stud, as in Marlene, which I think is a fabulous way of conceptualizing her at that moment in time. And it's a lovely interview. She's 20 and she's very kind of untouched by the industry in a nice sort of way. Winehouse is in Manchester to play her first gig outside London. In the brief period before our interview starts, she charges excitedly into the wrong venue, confuses a student radio interviewer by raving about Thelonious Monk. He's an old dead guy, and coaches her road manager into giving her a piggyback across Manchester city centre. My new ballet shoes and wet pavements don't mix, she explains. It's great, and it's a nice interview, and it sort of underpins just how sad that story ends up being. But she's at equal turns, eloquent and immature, and it's great to read. It's really great.
A Winehouse fan, Jez?
Huge. I live in Camden now, and so I encounter Amy Winehouse.
The ghost of Amy Winehouse, wherever you go.
30 times a day.
I used to live 2 streets up from 30 Camden Square, so...
Right. Yeah, and it's kind of eerie, because when I first lived in Camden, which was 15 years ago, she was actually about the place, and now it's statues of that same person. It is kind of extraordinarily moving. I still think that footage of her doing Love Is a Losing Game live with just a guitar at the Mercury Awards is probably among my top 10 ever performances that I've, film performances. It's absolutely, to use a word we used earlier, indelible.
Yeah. I mean, we've talked about it before on a podcast. I think it's safe to say that all of us love her to a greater or less extent, largely a greater extent. I think her second album was one of the best records to come out of this country in the last 30 years. That good. I think she's a tremendous songwriter, which people don't really talk about enough. I think we were talking about narratives, about Robbie Robertson's ability to write a narrative. She really, really did that. What kind of fuckery is this? You made me miss the Slick Rick gig.
Slick Rick gig, yeah.
I think she's marvellous and a huge loss.
Yeah.
She talks very nicely in this interview about picking up the guitar age 13 and rehearsing singing by imagining Tony Bennett was in the audience, which I think is lovely because we talked a few weeks ago about that duet that she did with him, and that was the last thing that she recorded, so it kind of came full circle.
Was that actually the last thing she recorded, that duet?
I think it was.
Almost, I think, yeah.
I mean,
what kind of fuckery is this? You made me miss the Slick Rick gig. If thought I didn't love you when I did. Can't believe you played me out like that.
Well, look, we have come to the end. I just want to mention, because I just only heard about this before we started recording, that the great photographer Baron Wolman died 3 days ago. I knew he was really unwell. But he was the house photographer at Rolling Stone and really defined a certain kind of very relaxed, impromptu, non-posed style of photography for Jan Wenner.
He was also one of the first guys to photographically document Haight-Ashbury, and particularly the Grateful Dead and Jefferson Airplanes houses and so on and so forth. A proper old-fashioned reportage photographer, wasn't interested in glitzy poses and all that sort of stuff. It is a terrific photographer.
Took some of the great, images of the obvious figures from the late 60s, the Who and Hendrix and Janis.
At the beginning of this decade, I bought all the Rolling Stone magazines from the 70s to 1980 and read them on the day they came out, concomitantly, 50 years later. Which means I look forward to it. It's a really good way of slowing down what it is you think about these people and kind of getting a chance to digest it at the pace, the snail's pace that it kind of occurred. And it's really fascinating. It's a really fascinating way to, if you think you knew about someone, it's a really fascinating way to sit down and imagine it on the day 50 years later that it actually happened.
Great idea.
Well, in a sense, that's
super idea.
That's what Mark does every day. Yeah.
Well, it's kind of what Rock's Back Pages is all about.
I've got one here.
But we're very much about actually, the contemporaneous writing from that time, and it's very interesting. You see attitudes shift, some terrible stuff. I mean, casual sexism and blah blah blah, and but it's endlessly fascinating.
Jez, we will furnish you with a free pass to the vaults of Rock's Back Pages in thanks for giving us your time. It's been a really really wonderful episode. I've really really enjoyed talking with you and my colleagues about a lot of different things. It's been really, really interesting. Have a safe journey back up to London. Or is that now you're going to be in trouble with the COVID police?
What I'm doing is a legitimate move. I've checked it.
We have worked out that Mr. Butterworth was in transit illegally on Thursday, the 5th of November.
Just say you were testing your eyesight.
You ain't
No, he reads Rolling Stone to do that. He doesn't need to go to Barn.
But perhaps if you read Rolling Stone on the train to London, then it's, hide.
Jez, thanks so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you, guys. I've enjoyed it immensely.
And Mark, will you talk us out with the last...
This is Perry Farrell's, shall we say, less than sort of perspicacious, if that's the right word,
it's great.
For predictions for how the music and the internet were going to be kissing cousins.
Well, that's great. We will be back in 2 weeks with Mark Cooper, writer and producer, erstwhile producer of Later with Jules Holland, all-around great guy. We're talking to him, and we'll see you then. And thanks again, Jez. Bye-bye, everyone.
Guys. Cheers. Take care.
Bye.
I can put over the web a brand new song that I came up with this morning and go and get some kind of cool images, have a friend help me if I wanted, and throw a song to you. So anybody can do it. Anybody can be distributed. That's just such a beautiful, beautiful theory, because I think it'll keep people honest. I think corporations will crumble, but there'll be new corporations started. And you know who will be? The guys that really get the hits. People that have honor. And don't just do it for the fast fucking buck, and don't care about their product. They don't know what they're putting out or what it does to people, and they put it out regardless. They should not be trusted.
That was Perry Farrell in conversation with Stephen Daly in 1996, concluding this week's Rock's Back Pages podcast. Many thanks to special guest Jez Butterworth. The hosts were Barney Hoskins and Mark Pringle, and it was co-hosted and produced by Jasper Murison Bowie. The Rock's Back Pages podcast is part of the Pantheon Podcast Network. You can find thousands of articles, as well as hundreds of full-length audio interviews, at rocksbackpages.com.